Alright guys, and welcome to the third part of this practical session, which is securing against SQL injections. From the last video I said we're going to be doing path injections today, but I realized that I forgot to talk about the role of ORMs, that's object relational mappers, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So the video for path injection is going to be the last. And so today we are talking about ORMs. My name is Ngane Emmanuel, and you're watching part of the building secure, scalable, fault-tolerant, low-latency APIs with Spring Boot and Java series. And we are multiple lessons into this video. So if you want to catch up, please go back and start from the beginning or watch other videos to see to get more understanding of where we are today. So last class we did SQL injection simulation. We simulated a basic attack. We talked about input validation and exception handling. We also saw important things as sending back status codes, very generic error messages, and again input validation. Today we are going to talk about ORMs, and when we're configuring our system, when we're starting this application, we included something called JPA, Data JPA, which is the Spring framework for persistency, right? This allows us to communicate with the database and makes database communication more efficient. Today we're going to be using these ORMs, that's object relational mapper, to replace our repository that we created here. So we are going to dive right in. The first thing we're going to do is create a class which is JPA. So I don't want to do JPA repository, I want to do repository. So user, so let's say ORM user repository. Okay, and we are going to be so in order to do that we need to extend JPA repository. Okay, but now the JPA repository is going to take two arguments. It takes two arguments. One is the class which so the model which you want to use as the persistent entity. So the persistent entity, which is our model here, which is the user class, right? So the entity is going to take the entity class, which is in this case the user, right? And then it's going to take the primary key of that entity, which in this case, in our case, is not a long but an integer. Okay, an integer. So we're going to keep it to an integer, which is an int. So we're going to have an integer there, but you see, in our repository, so we're going to user repository. I just want to import this class. Is it implements? Yeah, implements, not extend, sorry. So we implement the user repository, and then this is going to implement certain methods. Flush. No. So for the user, we have to change the ID to be an integer, just so that we have the correct implement I don't know. Let's see what it's saying. Save all and find. No, cancel. It extends or implement. Huh? Hold on, what's happening here? Must either be declared abstract. Oh, public abstract class. No. Oh, so okay, sorry, this is not a class, it's an interface. Okay, so there's a problem there. So it extends, yeah, JPA repositories. That's why we had the error. So it's not a class, it's an interface. So this is how you create a repository interface. And what this does is comes with pre-designed or pre-implemented methods that allows you to call them. So if you go to the JPA repository, you're going to see some of the methods here. We're going to have right, this ones are deprecated. So save flush and then save all flush. We have some find all. We have some methods. We have get by ID. We have so all of these methods are somehow deprecated. I think they'll be marked for removal soon. But again, this one get by ID is deprecated, but get reference by ID I think is a new method, but you could still use all of them. But you see, they come with pre-built method. Spring already built those methods, and it also implements safety and parameter binding properly and some validation checks, and that's why we use ORMs. Okay, so if we go now to our service class, yes, and in the section where we call the login and we use a repository called login, we don't want to call login like this. This is where we want to do most of the implementation, and so here we want to do, so we're going to create another method. Just say we're going to do public this case we're going to do list of users find all. We're just going to go login with ORM, right? And this is going to take string username and password. Okay, and what this is going, so what we are going to do is we are going to import. Yeah, remember the first time we used this repository, and so we are going to comment. So we are going to use a separate repository, and which is our newly created repository, which is our ORM user repository. And we're going to auto wire that in. We're going to use injection, field injection, and we're going to do auto wire private ORM repository. And oh, by the way, if you realize we are supposed to annotate this with repository class. Okay, repository. But we can also leave it because the JPA itself is it comes with already Spring managed annotations, and so even if you don't annotate it, so instead we did response state, sorry, repository. Even if we don't annotate it, okay, because we are extending the class which is Spring managed, the entire interface becomes managed by Spring, and so but it's always a good practice to always annotate with the repository. So if we come back to the service class, we can now use the ORM user repository here, and the first thing we want to do, we need to find user by username and password. Okay, and then use the ORM repository, and then check for blank or empty fields. So now we'll check for, of course, we're going to do our validations here. So we're going to check for blank empty fields, and then we're going to check if user is found, else to user not found exception, and that's the comment, and then we're going to return the found user. So that's our implementation procedure. And oh, by the way, just to talk about testing here, this is basically this is how you write functions when in test-driven development. I just wanted to bring that out because it's a particular, like I said, I'll be throwing in some Easter eggs here. These are just like extra information for you. So if you are ever wondering of doing like test-driven development, basically most of your methods are defined like this with the implementation strategy, and then you write the test, then you come and implement it as so that it passes a test. And usually you have methods like this with just comments telling you each stage of implementation. That said, we can now start implementing. We can start implementing our JPA repository. We can start implementing our service, which the first thing is we need to check for blank fields. So we're going to use validator.validate username. Right. I'm also going to do validator.validate password. Also, we could just create a single validator and pass both of them, the two arguments there, or we could create another method which takes multiple arguments and validate them. But for now, we keep it simple, and you can extend the validator as much as you want. Again, if you have not seen it, this is coming from our last video. We did the validator there, so we'll go check it out. And so when we validated the inputs, we are supposed to find the user by the username, and this is where the JPA repository come in. So we're going to do the ORM JPA user repository, and when you do the dot, you see different methods which are already implemented for us by Spring, and you could do a lot of things. So we can find the user, so we can find by, right, and you can use the existing fields, right? You could use fields to let's say username and password. So these fields already exist, and you could use them like this, as you can see. As long as they exist in the user model, you could call them directly on the method. You call them directly on the repository object, and then you can pass the username, which is a username and password, right? And we need now to implement this particular method in the user repository, and this is going to return this is going to return user. Okay, and this is going to find make method void. No, because we're going to use it later. So you see, we don't now. The beautiful thing about JPA is that we don't different ORMs will use different implementation, but with Spring Data JPA, once you define like a find by like this like a get request, like you're trying to select something from the database, you can define the fields, like you can define like find by username and password, and essentially what you are essentially doing is doing like select all from users, right, where username is equals to username, right, and then the and, which is this and here, password is equal to password. Okay. Now, if you had additional fields, you could add them here, or you could use a different operator. Instead of an and, you could use like an or. Okay, and you could do a lot of things. So the JPA is implemented in such a way that it allows you to use like the in the camel cases, as you can see, the names of the field and certain operators to pair and do more complicated, a little bit complicated queries without actually writing out the native query itself. And it really takes out the boiler code and really does the heavy lifting for you for most of the basic queries, and that's why a lot of people really choose it much. So this, however, is going to implement safe string binding, parameter bindings. So it's going to bind this into the SQL query safely, like we did the previous time. So to avoid SQL injections and other flaws in the query. So that said, we are going to go back to the service layer, and we have gotten our user, and so we are going to like create a variable. Normally, if you see me creating a variable, it's a new user. So I'm basically just creating like a user like equal to this like that. But with the new Java, you can just create a variable, and this will automatically determine the output of this, and then assign the data type to this variable automatically. So if I hover on top of that, you see that the data type is a user right here. Okay, so that is how that works. And now we can check. Let's see. Let's check if the user is found, else through the no file exception. So we want to say if user is equal to null, so on through user not found exception but credentials, like we did the last time. Else we just return the list of users. We just return. So we can do array list dot, I think it's to list. I thought it's like there is methods. It's so how do we do the last one? It was interesting. These are save. Oh, so I kind of removed it. But we could simply just like a list of user. And by the way, you're not supposed to return a list. You can just return a single user here. I'm just putting the list because of the check we did with the SQL injection. So I could literally just remove the list, right? But I want to don't break this. I don't want to break these other implementations, right? And go ahead and change it. So the best thing to do is to just like create a list here and put so we have like a user equals to new array list, and then we have the user there. And what we can do is we can just return. We can do users dot add with user, and then we return the users. We return users. There we go. This is so long, but again, this is not good design, obviously, but this is meant to show you certain things. Okay, so if you watch the beginning of this series, I explained what we'll be doing, and so it's not really advisable to come in the middle of the series, hence you're going to not really understand what we've been doing so far. This is all about security, and obviously we are going to refactor the code eventually, I think in the next class, just before, in fact maybe this class, and we're going to move the other ones. So right now we have our login, which takes our login with the ORM, which takes in the information and then passes it to the ORM and find the user by username and password, and then return the, and then check, validates the, so it validates the inputs and then check if the user was found. If not, then throws an exception which we have already created in the last class, and then add the user to the list and then return the user. So in the controller, we now want to use the login with, rather than the login with the ORM function instead here. And so when we run the class, when we run the entire application and we simulate the request again, we should be able to get exactly the same result, showing that, yeah, so when we log in with a bad credential which is not found, we get a bad credential, which is what we wanted. However, if we log in with a good credential, we get a good credential, we get a result. If we try to do an SQL injection, say, what's that? We try, say, so username equals to admin, and then it closes, and then it does all, right? Password or 1 equal to 1. Okay, then it closes that, and then it's going to be like same thing here. Okay, so password is equals to, so like just like same thing again. If we try this, remember that will work, but again now this passes. The first time we did with the SQL injection, this works and returned the list of all our users, and that's why we did the list thing rather than just return a single user. But now this is checking this as a string, so it's checking if there is a user called this entire string, and if there is a password that matches this entire password. And in our database we don't have that, and so this so ORMs implement security by eliminating SQL injections, especially those very basic SQL injections such as this, and certain degree of complicated injections. And that's why it's very important to use ORM, because they implement robust security in terms of injection attacks. So we have seen JPA in work and how simple it is to integrate JPA. If you actually want a full tutorial of integration of JPA, comments in the description, in the comment below, and I'm going to make it much more explicit and simpler. But in this video, we assume that you have certain knowledge and understanding in this series of Spring and Java and coding in general. So basically, I'm hoping that you take the ideas, the concepts, rather than the code itself. So you don't really need a background in all of that. But you can follow along. If you follow along, you have exactly the same output. Again, all of this is being tracked and put in the GitHub repository, which is, the link is in the description of this video. So we can now just refactor our class. So we can start with a controller, which we require, rather than a list, we require just a single user object, right? And then this, now we will just require the service to, so our services will simply just return a single user object rather than a list. Okay, well, this is not the one, so we'll move those ones there, and this is the one we care much about. And because we are doing this, okay, we don't need this argument here. We have the user, and we can simply just return the user. Okay, and we have to just delete that. And that is our implementation thus far. And we can go now to the, so we have the exception here, which is okay. We have the validator for now, which is simple and okay. This is the implementation for those of you who are wondering. The exception handler, that's okay. The pump file, which I show you the dependency of JpaRepository, and the ORM, and you have that. Okay, that is okay too. And now we have the user service, the JPA repository class. We're not touching that. Okay, so this is what I wanted us to do. We don't need all of this anymore. Once again, because we already showed you, what was happening. But I'm going to leave it in here, and I'm also just going to, in this user service, just going to clean this up real quick. Right, and since we are using our JPA completely for the remainder of this course, I am going to register the user. So the register is going to use user repository ORM. What's this going to happen? It's going to use ORM.save user. Now the beautiful part about the save word is that the ORM already implements the save keyword, and the truth is that you don't really, there are certain these kind of methods, you don't really need to define them again within the JPA repository because they're already defined, except you want to override them and have a different behavior. But as you can see, it's already implemented and we don't have any errors. If you try to run the same thing, it's going to go exactly the same. If you try to add a new user, it's going to go. So right now we can just comment this section out. I'm going to leave it here, but just comment it out because we're not using this again, right? And I'm going to, this is now no longer useful. I'm simply just going to comment that out. So we have a list, and we have certain things there. So this is cleaner, right? So because we are not using this, I'm going to put this right at the bottom here so that things we are using they get to be at the top, so that becomes at the bottom, and the auto wire, we'll leave it there for the time being. And so we have our two methods. We have our dependencies wired in and our register and our login method, and that is how we are going to structure from what we're going to be, just what we're going to be using henceforth. So let's try again and make sure that everything works perfectly before we end the video. Alright, so if we try to send a request, we should have a bad request. There we go. If we so we should have success. There we go, success with the information as needed. And yeah, and then if we have like an empty, we should have a bad request again. Yes. If we have like a wrong password, we have a bad credential again. Exactly. So that is what we want, obviously. We have validation set up, JPA wired in, and security for basic SQL injection wired in. So in our next video, we are going to look at, we're going to touch a bit of path injection. That's I think it's like path injection, where we have the directory. They try to use injections to manipulate your directory, and I'm going to explain how that works. We're going to simulate the basic injection attack with that, and we're going to see how we can protect it. And just a heads up, there's a very interesting question on lead code talking about path resolving, and I think we will use a similar code there to resolve the path and then check it against our valid path. So our validation algorithm might, will be very interesting. And you're also going to understand why, you're also going to see a particular design method why I use the interface to initialize our validation interface first, then use the implementation. So we're going to discuss about it in the next video, and it's going to be an interesting one too. So stay tuned. And if you have liked this video, please comment, like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get alerts on when I upload new content. Connect with me on my social medias, on my LinkedIn, on my GitHub. Clone the project on the GitHub. Don't forget to star it, and let's continue to learn and continue to practice Until the next video, have a nice day. Bye.